so let's talk about skills, bringing skills into focus. And we heard all about systemic HR and talent intelligence from Josh in the keynote. And so what we're going to spend a little bit of time on is hearing from Ellen and Josh about how they have applied talent intelligence to the toughest business problems in their world. And let me just talk a little bit before we go into the questions about what we mean by systemic HR. If you caught it in Josh's keynote, we're thinking about skills in the center of solving your talent problems, because every talent problem is not just a recruiting problem, it's not just a retention problem, it's not just a reskilling problem, it's not just a redesign problem, it's all of these problems together. And skills are the only way for you to get the insights to solve those problems. So that's what we're going to talk about. And I'm so excited to hear from Josh and Ellen about what they're doing, because I think they are doing some really, really cool things. So Josh, I want to start with you. Tell us a little bit more about yourself and your role, and what are the biggest business problems that you're working on?
Sure, yeah. So I'm part of the talent acquisition team, but obviously we work across HR. We have been at PTC, so we're a software company that supports the manufacturing industry, so everything from computer-aided design to product lifecycle management, augmented virtual reality, those kinds of things. So our clients are really high tech, and our business is really focused on serving that audience. So as you can imagine, the pressure is really on for the people in the corporate functions to get it together and also to attract talent. That was one of the big things when we started this HR transformation, is talking about how do we match that experience that we have for our customers with people who are applying to jobs, people working at the company, things like that. So we've been on a 3-year journey. With talent acquisition, we've rolled out a lot of things, including Eightfold, and now the big piece of work that we're doing is internal mobility, kind of redefining our career architecture, thinking about how do we create a program that really speaks to our employees as well as future employees and alumni.
That's great. So matching the experience that people have as consumers with the experience that they have in your organization or applying the organization. Really big concept, obviously, and something that I think all organizations are aspiring to. So that's great. So cool. Josh. Alan, sorry. We just heard from Alan.
My name is Alan Kumar. I'm an Elastic Talent Program Manager at Dolby Labs. For those that don't know, Dolby Labs specializes in enhanced sight, vision, audio, and gaming solutions. In my world, I oversee the Elastic Talent Program, which is Dolby's internal non-employee workforce program. I've been with the company for about 1.5 years. In prior worlds, I also worked for Upwork, which is an online talent marketplace, was on the MSP side, was at Apple for the greater part of 5 years, and what we're really trying to do is build something very boutique, unique, and interesting for Dolby that's a right-fit solution. And with Dolby, we're also the first customer for Talent Flex, which we are excited to be the first partner and to make our first hires into it, and yeah.
I love the notion of elastic talent, so we want to hear more about what elastic talent means and how you deploy that. So let's start with you, Josh, now going into the first R of this systemic HR model, where we say, first one is recruiting, and of course you've got to recruit all the time, and we've heard from Josh and others, labor market is so tight and unemployment rate is like the lowest again, to 53-year low again. How do you recruit in this tight market? How do you do this?
It is, it's a tough market. Maybe a little bit easier with some of the tech industry right now, but overall the key, key transformational element was really getting more trust with our business and getting closer to what those skills are that they need now, but also what are the skills that are coming down the pike. How are we supporting that from everything from even our early career programs and our intern program, and really trying to build a talent pipeline so that it is easier for us to continuously attract and fill the roles that we need. So a lot of what we've done even in changing our intake process, is through kind of the Eightfold calibration and using that to actually show our hiring managers as we're starting their role, hey, if you want these 5 skills, this is what happens to the talent market. So I think we're really trying to establish more credibility with our business and more trust by just being more transparent about what's actually happening in the market, locations, tough skills to find. Can we upskill those people if maybe they have 5 of 8 things that they want? And so this process is really helping us open that conversation, which is in turn making it a lot easier for us to fill the pipeline more on demand.
Yeah, I love the notion of turning the recruiters maybe into the more talent advisors, right? Because
Exactly.
it used to be,
Yep.
like Josh mentioned, the IT service department. Here's a role for you to fill. Go out and recruit it. And the data, the insights that you get now, and the skills and the availability of the skills really turns them into these advisors that can say, well, if you're trying to recruit in this location, there's actually no talent out there, right?
Yep.
That's
And my team is probably sick to death of hearing it, but I'm like, we are not the Pizza Hut model anymore. We don't take orders. We partner with our teams to understand what it is that they need, and the talent advisor model, we advise them. So now we've kind of turned things on its head where people are like, hey, I'm thinking about this role, and they're reaching out to their talent acquisition partner, and they're trying to learn before they even open the requisition, hey, where's the best place, for me to do this? Are there internal candidates? Like, how should I think about going about it? Which is a complete sort of turn from a couple years back.
And it's so exciting that they have the data now, right? They have the insights, because otherwise they could just tell them, well, I think there's no talent in Waco, Texas, or something like that for that talent skill.
Yeah.
But now they can show them with the data.
The business, they focus on data. So we have to meet the business where they are. And there's just no excuse not to show up to that meeting with the data and understanding the market anymore, because otherwise we're going to go back to the Pizza Hut model.
Yeah.
So.
I love the Pizza Hut model. I'm moving away from the Pizza Hut model. That's great. Alan, tell us a little bit more about what you're doing with Elastic Talent, because for me, when we talked about Elastic Talent, for me, this was the classic redesign of jobs and work and employment models when we talked about this systemic HR model, where you say, well, maybe the answer is not a full-time hire or an employee hire at all. Maybe it is going outside. So tell us more about that.
Yeah, I think for us, it's, how do you leverage talent in an even more globalized world, right? It's one with the pandemic. There's different numbers that people put, but it accelerated, how we work potentially years to decades, and I'm a firm believer in that one. And, people got used to working with boxes on a screen and working with global teams. And for me, a big part of it is, well, how can we, get ahead of that type of strategy? It's one where, the best talent doesn't need to live within 20 miles. You don't have to, recruit contract workforce in that area. And then how do we sort of, do a follow the sun type of methodology? Are there resources that we can tap into in South America? What about Europe and all these type of pockets? And where does it ultimately make the most sense? The other piece of it is the relationship with the work has changed for a lot of people, right? You can point back to the great quit, whatever you want to call it on that type of area. But, I've always been a firm believer that, hey, potentially in the next decade, 50% of the workforce in some capacity could be independent or open to consulting. And how do we sort of meet that way in the middle? Companies aren't, people don't necessarily want to be, tied to a company for 5 to 7+ years. They want to take charge of their own process. So it's one where, we got to be able to, it's a shift, but also a big opportunity. And how do we get ahead of that one? So for me, it's one, how do we meet that one? Don't really pack it into, hey, I have one hire, let me try to pack it into everything. How do we potentially deconstruct that? What are the right skills that sort of make the most sense? And where can we meet in the middle of, maybe you can't find that one resource, and I think that's a good thing to have, to be like, okay, what's the actual main things that we need to unpack and go from there, and to really be able to think, how can we leverage potentially freelancers, vendors, or other solutions that make the most sense from a business perspective, and to just continue with the trends and changes, and how can we adapt and be better as a business.
I love that, because it gives your business a lot more flexibility too, right? So we've seen the tech layoffs and all of that, and I think the reason for that was because they grew too quickly with full-time hires. If they had used more flexible work model, a flexible model of hires or employment scenarios, probably wouldn't have needed to be necessary. So I like that a lot, and it resonates so much to me for the next generation wanting to not work like we all work. I have 2 teenagers at home, and they always look at me and say, I don't want to work like you. I don't want to work 60 hours for the same company. I want to work a little bit here, and then I want to go surfing, and then I want to work a little bit somewhere else, and I want to go swimming, right? So they're like, that's crazy. So, and I think it's not just them. It's every, the younger generation just doesn't think about work the same way. And I think it's great that you're going that direction. Now, how did you get started on this? Because I know a lot of organizations are concerned about going to this direction. They say procurement owns it, like they say co-deployment, all of these, like the ancient lawsuit of like 30 years ago, 20 years ago from Microsoft is still like being quoted.
Oh, yeah.
So.
No, I think it really depends on, what makes the most sense for the business. I've worked at large places and I've worked at startups, and it's one where you got to figure out what works best for your business, what works best from a risk profile standpoint, and ultimately what works best for the talent strategy that you're looking to. It's one where, you can't assume that it's going to be a snap of the finger change overnight. We as leaders can tell people, as much as we can about this is what you should do. Yeah. It really ends up being about change management and adoption, and that's not really a small thing to do, right? So it's one where, hey, when you first come in, understand where things are at, make your own assumptions of what strategy you want to run, and, assume if, look into it, does it make sense, and be able to pivot, from there and figure out, what's the right areas, where are we trying to look at from a skills perspective, where are certain geographies that make the most sense, where does the talent sort of live, who do your partners need to be too, right? Ultimately, you should be driving to build a toolkit for managers, and it's one where the toolkit isn't built overnight. At one point, it might be just a messy drawer full of stuff, and at some point, you can make something that's very sophisticated, that it's one where you can implement it, and it really goes with the strategy that you're trying to go to. But, start small and then scale, figure out pilots, figure out, where you can tinker and mess up, fail quickly if you need to, but keep it going and have the right partners in place too, so.
I love that, and I think that's also probably how you got started. Josh, how did you get started with the talent acquisition transformation with Eightfold?
Yeah, so really, we knew we were going to sort of rip out and start over. That was kind of the go-forward plan. But honestly, we were looking for CRMs, and we thought we were going to need to sort of patch a CRM with an applicant tracking system, and that was going to be, how we were going to do it. So I more or less kind of stumbled across it. But then when I saw what it could do for us in other parts of HR, that's what kind of stuck with me. Because sure, kind of what the starting point, to your point, is like I just needed a drawer with a couple of things in it. I didn't really need everything yet. But I think part of what was important to me is also getting a partner that was going to continue growing and keep building things that I'd be able to use down the road. So for us, we needed that kind of framework for recruiters to hold on to in terms of like coaching them through the process, giving them some data points that they could actually have a conversation with, because it took time to upskill them to the point where they are now. And basically, Eightfold kind of provided for a lot of that. It also provided just for a lot of basic efficiencies, like we were manually scheduling people, and we didn't really have a good way to get through hundreds of thousands of applications and things like that, which a lot of systems can do. But it was really those more advanced abilities for us to see into skills and really see, oh wow, like it really does make a difference if I require this versus not. And I think even for a lot of our recruiters, it opened their eyes even, and they're working in the market every day. Yeah. So it was, that was kind of what pushed us.
How was the change, the mindset change from your recruiters and from your hiring managers to go from like the job model to more the skill-based model? Was that kind of hard to do?
Yeah, and I would say, honestly, it's still ongoing, because a lot of people are like, I've been hiring for 30 years and I don't know who you are, but,
Why are you talking about this?
Exactly. But I think, it's the 90% of people who have like had the aha moment already, and we're working on that other 10%. But I think over time, like it's just the momentum is going to shift a lot of that over. But it is a lot of hard work. We're on year 3 of transformation. It's a lot of work to keep that going, because as we're trying to get the fixed number of people who were in the organization on day 1, new people are coming every day. So we're trying to get those people, onto the plan as well. So it's work. Change management will never end. It's going to keep going. So
that makes it interesting, right?
It does. Yeah.
Alan, tell us a little bit more about that mindset shift from like job models and also employment models for you, right? Because if you think about the like elastic workforce, as you call it, that was a big mindset shift for sure.
Yeah, I think it's really about being deliberate as like, what are the core pieces that you need and really shifting the mentality of like, hey, I have this potential headcount to work with. Does it make sense to pack everything into one resource, or does it make more sense to be like, okay, these are the more core critical pieces of it that I want to move forward? Like I'll give an example, right? You can break, and one of my success stories with Talent Flex was we had a leader that had a very specific role in mind, but we were able to really break it up into really 4 key aspects of it. Like how much of this person's work really needs to be events marketing, how much of this person's work needs to be operations. And it's one where what we found is, we challenged them like, hey, really think about this more deliberately. And it was, pretty successful until like, okay, we can break this out into maybe a more part-time based project, and it actually ends up fitting well into better, with candidates potentially too. Like, hey, this works well, and I can pick up other clients. And it's also from a business continuity standpoint. One piece drops out of 4, you can keep it going a little bit easier than if one person dropped and you got to find and wait, 3 months to potentially backfill this type of resources. So it really helps from a continuity standpoint, and also like, what's the main things that you need. And it's really thinking about how do you break these things into tasks? How do you break these things into potentially very defined projects, and then to really be able to go from there. I am a firm believer that the relationship is changing with folks, and, especially as we go on through the years, it's going to be even more critical. So we want to be able to get ahead of that and just not be able to think like, oh, someone left the company, where's the old job description? It's one like, nope. What do we need to start, stop, or continue? And to be able to drive of it from there, and to be able to, what's the best use of, finding talent? It might make your full-time searches easier if you throw things over from an elastic side, and also just makes a little bit more sense too of like, what are the key critical things, and where can we move on from there, from that standpoint, to get from point A to point B and wherever it may be. It's not to say that everything fits in the right elastic lens, but there are a lot of good time and places for it to really consider how can you break out this work and assess it from a more holistic standpoint. So
That's a classic like redesign of the work itself, right? Because if you have everything, as you said, bundled in one job, then it's very hard to understand and modularize all of that based on the skills. So did you get any pushback from like middle managers, line managers? Because I'd imagine like, I have this head count, right? And now I don't have the head count, and that kind of thing.
yes, I am still in the
I'm
phase
sure.
of that. It's a very big piece of change management and driving adoption. It's one of those things where you can pretend to be the smartest person in the room or have all the right examples to sort of point to. Ultimately, the leaders still need to make that sort of change, right? And I think what we found pretty successful is how can we teach people from their own potential peers? Like how can we actually give the right type of use case to really think about this deliberate and really show the success stories? And we find that to be quite compelling. But I think that's the hardest piece. So you got to find the right leaders, the right stakeholders to partner with. You got to find areas where you can potentially pilot something with a certain type of group and be able to show the success stories, and assume that it's not a snap of the finger thing that can happen overnight as much as we all want it to be, and really be deliberate that, hey, it's going to be a journey. There's a lot of stuff that needs to go into place. This isn't something maybe people have done before, and just because you're an expert at it doesn't mean that they're an expert at it, in the same way that I have no idea what they are potentially doing on their side of the world, right? So how do you simplify the process? How do you, better enable these type of levers and all those type of things? So it's a journey.
No, it's a journey, right? Yeah, exactly. 1 step forward, 2 steps back sometimes, right? And same for you. Now, Josh, tell us a little bit more about how you're now going from the talent acquisition, the recruiting kind of notion, to also retaining people more with these like better jobs maybe, or more suitable jobs, and then also with reskilling people with the mobility and helping people find a job internally in the organization. I know you're just starting out on that.
We are just starting out, but the exciting thing is that our leadership recognizes the need for that, and I think part of it is because we keep pushing like different models, different ways of thinking, with contingent, with other things. And I think our leadership, we've made the case now to the leadership that they understand that this is, we have to do this. So they've actually made it a corporate initiative this year, which is really exciting because we really got that tailwind to start the work. So right now, it's a lot of pulling all the stakeholders in, and it's, that's a lot of work to try to get, your IT stakeholders, your legal stakeholders. We're talking at least about AI, so it's a lot of conversations about, the legalities and the challenges with New York and things like that. So we are kind of at the beginning stages, but there's pieces of it that we already know, right? We talk to our employees. We know what they're looking for. we know why people are leaving the company, you know, and a lot of it is they want more opportunities. And in some cases, you know, not that anything's an easy fix, but the really regrettable situations are those people who left and we had an opening and they just didn't know about it. So there are some things that are just a really sort of like quick win type thing. You know, I don't like the low-hanging fruit thing, but I think when we look at it, you know, we already know, okay, just by creating a program and giving it visibility and having this whole thing be a corporate initiative, that a lot more employees are going to be able to say, oh, I didn't know I could just go and look for a job there. But it's a much bigger piece of work of really defining what our career architecture looks like, what the career paths are. And obviously, there's a lot of wins to having a talent intelligence tool to help us with some of that process. But yeah, it's really just pulling all those stakeholders in right now and having those hard conversations even around like, you know, yes, your employee may leave your group. They may go somewhere else. But that's probably, you know, the biggest hurdle that we're facing and that I've heard from other people who have done similar programs as well.
The talent hoarding, right? The change
Yes.
management with managers, all of
Yep.
that. But and you're working together with all the different groups in HR, right? This
Yes.
is not something that you
No,
can do in
this
talent
is not,
acquisition
no.
alone. Yeah, yeah.
It's actually being led by by the talent development team. So, yeah.
But you're part of it, and then
Yep.
other groups are part of it, probably DEI, as you mentioned
Yep,
too,
our
right?
compensation team,
Compensation.
everybody, you know, everybody in HR it's all hands on deck, so.
Classic, like what we call systemic HR, because it's not a recruiting problem alone, right?
Exactly,
It's not
yeah.
just recruiting
Yeah.
or a retention problem alone. They all go together. Now, Alan, tell me a little bit more. Who is involved in Elastic Talent from your side and your organization?
Yeah, on our side, I think with most programs, right, like it's one where we live in HR or on our people team. You know, I think from an industry perspective, it could really depend on if it lives in procurement or if it lives in HR. I personally favor it to be in HR just because you really have a real people element of it
Yes.
versus maybe treating people as a commodity. So in my opinion, I think that's a big piece of it. But our greater, broader people team, you know, we're trying to enact this as a lever to be able to think about work differently and how to be able to utilize it from there. Obviously, you have to have legal be a key stakeholder, just because we don't create the rules or we don't create the laws, but we do need to make sure that we're compliant.
You need to follow them.
And enforce them, and especially if it's part of a global program, things are changing constantly.
Yeah.
Different bills with different fund numbers attached to them are always arising, and how do we sort of pivot the work of it from there? But largely driven by our people team, and it's building this. Not a new muscle, but it's one like a more strategic muscle, right? Of how do we leverage this? Everybody's hired contractors. How do you think about it differently in a different lens of like how, from a greater, broader ecosystem standpoint, to be able to leverage freelancers, vendors, and other types of different nuanced capacities of it, and not just thinking of the regular 40-hour week worker and thinking about more deliberately in terms of outcomes. So. Yeah.
It's so exciting to see this finally coming to the forefront in some organizations. We've been talking about this for such a long time. I think that finally the contingent or the alternative or the elastic workforce will come into HR. I totally agree with you, because like procurement won't look out for the skills and for the talent, right? For that kind of angle, they'll look more for the contracts and for the spend. But people are more than contracts and spend.
Exactly. The cost savings shouldn't be the main driver. It's
That's
really what
right.
are the business strategy and goals.
Exactly. Okay, we want to leave a few minutes for questions. So like just really, really quickly, one word of advice or one word of wisdom for the audience.
Yeah, I would say, you know, technology is important, but you have to really have the strategy before you pick the technology. And I think, you know, it's the most important thing. If you go out and you think a technology is going to solve your problem, it's not going to. You got to have the process in place in order to utilize the technology and do the change management.
Absolutely great. Awesome.
Yeah, maybe not one word, but I would just say, you know, start small. You know, leverage the right tools. There's a lot of great stuff like Eightfold out there that you can really look into that makes your life easier. And then, you know, really be able to monitor and measure. You know, my key pillar is, you know, how can we make this reportable, repeatable, scalable, and governed? And that should be the sort of the North Star with how you assess things. So start small and go from there.
Great pieces of advice. Strategy before technology, and starting small and then iterating and learning. Great pieces of advice. I think we have a few minutes of questions for the audience, and I think Lauren is going to go around and like bring the microphone around.
I had a question about, I think what you, both of you had alluded to in a couple different comments about even as you're doing the work that you're doing, that it seems to require a rethinking from line managers about how they're actually designing the work. And in the same way that we're atomizing talent, right, into skills, that the idea of the job, not even as a person, but like all these functions all together. Just curious to see what you guys have found are the best practices for getting people to shift as operating managers into that new mindset.
I'm happy to go for, yeah. It's one where there's no like great toolkit of like, hey, run this through a 9-box or run this through a chatbot. I really think it's about really being prescriptive. And, you know, from there, you can build it out from there. You know, what I tend to find is, you know, if you meet with a leader and you're doing an initial scoping call, it's really trying to stack rank, you know, what are the main, you know, important pieces of it from there. And then also, you know, depending on what the scope of it would be, like, is this a backfill? Is this a new need? Whatever it may be, you know, maybe run it through like a start, stop, continue type of model, or, you know, those type of elements of it. Or can you think about like, hey, is there opportunities from the team to potentially upskill? Like, can we maybe defer this to another team member? So I wish I had a very simplified sort of, you know, hey, do X, Y, and Z checklist. BuzzFeed survey to tell you what type of cake you are. But a lot of times it is really, you just have to be prescriptive and meet with the business and understand from there.
Yeah, and I would just say, yeah, I don't think there is a best practice because I think this is just so new. But I will say, you know, for us, I mean, we're trying to have the strategic conversation when new role comes up, but we're also really leaning on our HR business partner team to have a lot of those higher level strategic conversations with the business leadership as a whole to think through, okay, why do we have 12 different, you know, job descriptions for a software developer, and like what is it that we really need? So we are, you know, one cog kind of in the wheel when hiring, you know, when there's hiring needs where we're kind of pushing that envelope a bit, but we're trying to attack it from multiple angles because I don't think that we will, you know, alone the star recruiter sort of be able to fix that. I think it's really the systemic conversations that need to take place, and then hopefully as line managers have roles open, we kind of meet somewhere in the middle.
Fantastic. Thank you. I think we have time for one more question.
Hi, thanks for that. Josh, this one for you. I guess it's a build from the line manager question to TA. Recognizing you're saying you're sort of 3 years in and as TA professionals have had to go on a journey, like what have you done to help upskill the TA professional to recognize that fundamentally they are now advisors rather than the Pizza Hut?
Yeah, thank you. I do like Pizza Hut, but is it lunchtime yet? So some of the things that we've done, I mean, we've rolled out like team trainings and those kinds of things. You know, there was a lot of enablement. Most of the enablement, frankly, when we rolled out Eightfold was to the recruiters because, I mean, even to hiring managers, there wasn't really that much of an impact on their day. But for the recruiters, this was a completely new way of thinking about how we do intake, thinking about how a job works. And so a lot of what we did was just get them the data and then coach them on how exactly to present that data and then what kind of scenarios could come up in a conversation with hiring managers. And you really got to think about like the things out here because those are the things where it ends up going sideways, you know. Where the hiring manager is like, well, where did this data come from, and why, you know, why should I care about this, and things like that. But I think what we've seen over time, you know, different questions have come up. We've hosted different trainings kind of based on where we're seeing the most issues. The other big challenge was sort of in different locations. Like we're a global company. So a lot of the questions that would come up in the US are very different than the ones that come up in Europe, right? Because we've got more language requirements. We have different, you know, regulations we have to follow in those different locales. So it wasn't just about like, okay, great, let's do a global training on Eightfold and like call it a day. It was really about listening to the questions coming in, really focusing on those scenarios and doing that kind of customized model based on where people were. So, and that's still, you know, again, it's ongoing. We've got recruiters coming, you know, more people coming in, so.
Thank you. Ellen, you have anything to add to that? How are you?
Very well said, and I don't want to speak on the TA side.
But I know you manage a lot of change and change in perspective too. I love the storytelling and the just inspiring through sharing examples. And what I think what you both talked about is really how HR can take this systemic approach powered by talent intelligence, skills data, and talent intelligence to solve any of the business problems. And really, what we are also saying a lot of times about systemic HR is falling in love with the problem first, not coming with the solution. When you have a recruiting hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? But not every problem is a recruiting problem. So I think with that, we'll finish up with the next one.